systems of the Americas, and also COVID-19 pandemic and how that has affected this work. We're going to be hearing about from the regulatory authorities, from health ministries. We have experts with us during this 10th conference of the Pan American Network for Drug Regulatory Harmonization. I thank you all for being here. We would also like to thank the person who will preside over this session, Maria Antonieta Gamarra. She is from the National University of Asunción, a specialist in hospital administration and public health, with a certification in international leaders from PAHO. She has been the general director of Foreign Affairs at the Health Ministry, as well as the director of health surveillance during different terms, and currently from April until now. So welcome, Dr. Gamarra. We thank you for presiding over this session. We give you the floor. She is muted, says the interpreter.
Doctora Maria Gamarra, estás en mute.
You are muted, doctor. I apologize. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Jose Luis, and I welcome you to this second plenary session of the 10th Conference of the Pan American Network for Drug Regulatory Harmonization, PANDRA. We will hear from regulatory systems of the Americas and what the response has been to the COVID-19 pandemic. We will talk about topics that have to do with implementation of regulatory efficiencies, as well as challenges and strategies in specific areas. Now I give the floor to Dr. Elizabeth from the Device Center of Radiological Devices of the FDA of the United States. The keynote speaker for this session, Dr. Elizabeth Hillebrenner from FDA. Please open your mic and you have 15 minutes.
Good morning. It's a real pleasure to be with you. Thank you for having me this morning. I'm looking forward to sharing our experience in the United States with the use of emergency use authorization authorities for medical devices. So our authority for emergency use authorization is given to the FDA commissioner when the Secretary of the Health and Human Services declares a public health emergency or a significant potential for a public health emergency. And in the case of the COVID-19 pandemic, this declaration was made on February 4th, 2020. And that opens up this pathway whereby the commissioner of the FDA can temporarily authorize under the emergency use pathway, medical products to address, whether it's to diagnose, treat, or prevent a serious or life-threatening disease or condition that is caused by chemical, biological, radiological, or a nuclear threat agent, in this case, an emerging infectious disease. When the secretary goes, when the agency goes to consider a request for emergency use authorization, the things that we need to consider include whether the disease or condition caused by the agent is serious or life-threatening, whether the particular product may be effective to diagnose, prevent, or treat the condition. Now, this threshold, may be effective, is very different than our standard pathways, where in a standard pre-market review pathway for a medical device, we're looking at whether the product is safe and effective, whereby in the EUA process, we're looking at whether it may be effective. So along these lines, we consider the known and potential benefits and whether they outweigh the known and potential risks. This is a trade-off. You're looking at less data compared to what you would see in a standard pathway. And the trade-off is that you could bring products to market faster when they're urgently needed, but you're relying on less evidence. And we saw in some cases where later, as we learned more about certain products, we realized that we needed to make adjustments, that initial decision needed to be adjusted. Another thing that we have to consider when we're looking at an emergency use authorization request is whether there's an adequate, approved, or available alternative. So in some cases, we do issue EUAs when there are insufficient supplies of the alternative. So there is an alternative, it exists, just not in sufficient quantity. So from our center, the Center for Devices, our role in COVID-19 was really to facilitate the availability and access to medical devices through the EUA process, and also by engaging with the stakeholders in the device community, help them along. Sometimes we had stakeholders that were, or developers who were new to regulatory, new to FDA, new to making devices. And so they weren't familiar with our processes. And we tried to help them appropriately develop their products and come through the regulatory process in a smooth way. Now, we applied the EUA authority to requests for a wide variety of devices. Of course, tests were the first out of the gate, as they typically are in emerging outbreaks. But we also used our EUA authorities to authorize various types of devices for personal protection, ventilators and respiratory assist devices, circulatory support, products for dialysis, and then a variety of remote monitoring devices to enable healthcare to facilitate healthcare without so much direct interaction, putting folks at risk. Another thing we did was, I mentioned that the authority calls for us to consider the known and potential benefits and the known and potential risks. Well, those can change over the course of an outbreak, right? So as the situation on the ground was evolving, as we were learning more about science, we had to take that all into consideration on an iterative basis and continue to adapt our policies as appropriate as those circumstances changed. And I've included a link here for those who are interested in seeing the products that we have authorized for COVID-19. Now, this is a snapshot of the workload that we have seen in the US Center for Devices related to COVID. And I'll just flag that at a high level, it's just an incredible volume of work, 38% overall increase in workload in 2020. Now, this includes over 3,000 EUA requests, another almost 1,000 supplements. A supplement to an EUA request might be to add another use for a device. For example, you might have a test for diagnosing patients suspected of COVID-19, and then the developer does another study and shows that it can be used for screening asymptomatic individuals. That would be a supplement. We also have a pre-EUA process where we've received over 2,500 requests. And that's a way for us to sort of review on a rolling basis the data as it's generated by a developer. So they might complete one study, we look at it through the pre-EUA while they're continuing their validation. And then when their last set of data comes in, we're able to move very quickly on that final authorization. Now, when it comes to what we've actually authorized, we have over 400 IVDs, diagnostics that have been authorized under the EUA process, over 200 personal protective equipment products, over 100 ventilators, and over 50 other products. In total, when you add these up with the submissions that have come in through the standard pathways, like 510K for us, we have authorized over 1,900 medical devices to address the COVID pandemic so far. Now, this workload, of course, is huge for us, and it is really the equivalent of over 360 people, or 20% of our workforce, working full-time for a year. So it has had a tremendous impact on our center. A hallmark of what makes this work is communication and engagement with all of our stakeholders. I mentioned the pre-EUAs, where that's a one-on-one interaction with an individual developer. The same thing goes for, we set up a toll-free number and email boxes where we could have one-on-one conversations and interactions with developers of medical devices. And that works pretty well, especially in the beginning of the pandemic. It's very fruitful having those interactions. It can really speed development and products to market. However, with the tsunami of EUA requests, we had to come up with some creative ways to engage the community more broadly because we didn't have the resources to continue that level of one-on-one engagement. So some of the things we came up with are posting a frequently asked questions on our website. We post templates, EUA templates for different types of submissions. So you might have templates for different types of diagnostic tests, including home tests, antibody tests, ventilators, surgical masks. And these are sort of fill in the blank forms to really facilitate a developer validating their product and bringing it through the regulatory process. We also instituted virtual town halls and webinars. I think we just did our 74th town hall on tests, and we've done some on other products as well. And we have issued over 28 guidance documents and 17 revisions. And those revisions really reflect what I was saying about keeping up with the evolving nature of the pandemic and the state of knowledge of the science behind these products. And so we update the guidances as appropriate as we go on. Now, another hallmark of our response to COVID-19 has been using flexibility and innovation in the EUA process. This authority is general. The concept of may be effective, and considering the known and potential benefits and the known and potential risks gives us some room to exercise innovation in how we apply it. And so one thing we came up with new in this particular outbreak is the concept of an umbrella EUA. Now, an umbrella EUA is for multiple devices of the same type that meet the same criteria. So what we do is we authorize all devices that meet X, Y, and Z criteria. And then a developer who has a product that meets those sends us their information to support that. And if it actually does need it, then we add them to an appendix of that umbrella. Now, what this does is it really streamlines a lot of the paperwork. It does not change the science. It does not change our confidence level in a particular product, just streamlines the process for getting it through to authorization. Now, another thing I mentioned, the 28 guidance documents and 17 revisions. Now, these documents offer various types of regulatory flexibility tailored to different product areas based on the needs of the pandemic at any given time. So in the case of tests, for example, we came up with a notification policy in the beginning of the pandemic that allowed certain developers to begin using their tests once they were validated, and they notify us, just an email saying, I validated my test, ready to go, and then follow up with an EUA later. Other policies include flexibility around modifications to existing products and flexibility around adding sort of remote monitoring capabilities to existing products. A wide range of different flexibilities were introduced, tailored to a given situation through these 28 guidance documents. Another thing we've done, and we've done this in past outbreaks as well, is development of a reference panel for the molecular diagnostics. Now, I mentioned the trade-off in the bar for coming to market, and we get minimal data necessary for the EUA. Now, this idea of sending out a reference panel post-market allows us to double check, does the test really work? And then it also gives us a benchmark that all the different tests can be evaluated against so that you can compare relative performance. Something novel we've done in this outbreak is partner with the NIH to conduct independent evaluations of the tests themselves. Now, where the reference panel is, we're sending the material to the developer and having them evaluate their performance blindly. In these partnerships with NIH, the developer is sending their test to the NIH, and the NIH is evaluating First, we had a program for serology tests, and now we're setting up a program, it's actually in place, for antigen tests. This is something that other countries have been doing. We have been in touch with other countries, particularly in Europe, have established similar programs for antigen tests where they evaluate them themselves. When it comes to the post-market side of things, we keep a close eye, especially as the variants are emerging. When it comes to tests, there's a potential that their performance could be impacted by emerging variants. And so we have conditions of authorization that developers monitor for emerging variants and model whether the targets of their tests could be impacted by those variants. We do our own modeling as well. And we follow that very closely. We also monitor adverse events and other information. And when appropriate, we'll issue a warning letter. We've done 49 of those. In some cases, we even revoke an EUA. Now, this could be because of that trade-off I mentioned, where in the post-market space, we realize that a test is not performing or another product is not performing at a level that we think it should, or that other authorized products are performing at, and so it makes sense to revoke it. In the case of PPE, when the shortages were really dire, we had actually authorized decontamination systems, but then as the circumstances changed, they were no longer necessary, so then we revoked them. We've also had some products recalled, and I mentioned the test notification policy. In some cases where we've found problems with tests, sometimes through the NIH evaluation program, we have removed the tests from the notification list. And then we've also issued 29 letters to healthcare providers, and this just is to share information as we're learning it. We think that transparency to the community is just crucial as we work our way through this pandemic. So in closing, I wanted to just highlight our two key lessons learned. I mean, I could talk all day about our lessons learned because there are so many, but I would like to highlight the value of regulatory flexibility, being able to adapt as the situation changes, as we learn more about the science, and also the power of engagement. This ability to interact with the developers, help them with the regulatory process, work together. The combination of these two things is really like the secret sauce that helps us bring medical devices to the United States that are needed, and have been successful in bringing over 1,900 new devices for COVID-19 to the market here. So those are the two key things that I think I would like folks to take away, is the flexibility and the power of engagement. So with that, I'd just like to thank you so much for inviting me to share our experience with you.
Muchas gracias, doctora Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Dr. Elizabeth Hillebrunner, for that very interesting presentation. We've all gone through similar situations, and all the region's regulatory authorities, similar to what you've just described. Now, the panel, which will be guided by our moderator, Mac Lumpkin, leader of the Initiative of Regulatory Systems of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. With us for this session are the following panelists: Daniel Rodriguez, the procurement chief for PAHO and WHO; Maria Margarita Jaramillo, from the National Institute of Surveillance; from the Colombian Food and Medicine Authority, Alejandro Svarge; from Mexico, from the Federal Commission on the Protection of Health Risks, Pre-Qualification of Products, from WHO; Hervé Le the Collaborating Center of WHO of the International Surveillance of Adverse Events.
Director ejecutivo del Centro de Monitoreo de Uppsala. Le paso ahora la palabra a
I'll give the floor
y le agradezco muchísimo
to
que mantengan la discusión hasta las
Matt, and I thank you very much for sticking to your allotted time.
Adelante, Matt.
You have the floor, Mac.
Gracias, Dr. Gamora. Bom dia, bonjour, buenos dias, good morning,
Thank
everyone.
you, Dr. Gamara.
And I welcome all of you to this session, and I want to thank you again for joining us for this panel discussion today. Personally, I'm very delighted and honored to be moderating this panel discussion with this distinguished group of colleagues. And let me express my thanks to them at this time for taking time to join us. I think a special word of thanks is needed for our friend Hiti Silo, who has joined us this morning literally at the very last minute, as Mariangela Chamau had an unexpected emergency in Geneva. So Hiti, a very special thank you to you. Now, I'm going to try to share my screen here. Let's see if I'm capable of doing this. I think so. And as you know, this panel today will focus on the contributions of and challenges to the regulatory systems in the Americas to the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So let's take just a couple of minutes to try to set the scene. I think all of us who are involved in healthcare realize, hopefully, that if one is going to have a quality healthcare system, there are three fundamental components to that system. One, obviously, is you have to have quality practitioners. You have to have quality facilities in which for these practitioners to practice, and you have to have access to quality healthcare products. If any one of these three legs to this stool does not exist, even if the other two legs are world-class, one does not have a quality healthcare system. And when it comes to assuring that on a given market, that the healthcare products that are available to the practitioners and to the patients are indeed quality products that they can depend on, that is the job of the regulatory systems. So when we look at our regulatory systems around the world, we always have to give the message, they are not a distinct separate group doing something off to the side. They are a critical component to any quality healthcare system. And in the pandemic, I think one of the first things we learned was that the mission of these regulatory agencies did not change. They were still there, even more importantly, to assure that medical products were available to address the pandemic, but that these products were indeed safe, effective, and manufactured in an acceptable quality manner so that they could be these critical components of a quality healthcare system trying to address the pandemic. But as we all know, this unfolded extremely quickly, and it gave us all the challenges of extraordinary unknowns with public health imperatives and economic health imperatives that grew stronger and stronger every day. We knew this was a new agent that was causing the pandemic, about which very little was known. There were large numbers of people dying around the world, and no one was sure how to stop it. And economies were crashing around the world. All of this adding to a sense of panic and to a feeling that timeliness was of the essence. So there were many strategic challenges to regulators that this panic and this pandemic brought at the very beginning. One was, how do you stay scientifically robust? How do you not cut corners when everyone is asking you to do it? Because you realize if you're not scientifically robust, you're just guessing as to what the efficacy, the safety, and the quality are, and whether the product is going to do any good or even potentially do any good. One of the biggest challenges was trying to figure out, I mean, it's a challenge in normal times, but in the pandemic, trying to figure out what is your community's tolerance to the risk of the unknown about a product versus the known devastation that was going on because of the infection. And trying to figure out, as Elizabeth was just describing, how do you figure out whether there is a demonstrated positive benefit risk profile under the circumstances upon which to base an authorization when you have incomplete data? How do you become procedurally flexible to enhance timeliness of decision-making by perhaps eliminating redundancy, relying on other authorities to help you define and make your own decision, and what regulatory pathways are available to you to address this pandemic? And if there aren't any, are there pathways like Elizabeth was describing that they did that you could legitimately create to help address the pandemic? And then finally, the issue of communication, and how do you as a regulator communicate forthrightly to inform the public each step of the way, even when it's things the public and the media and your political bosses don't want to hear? Because at the end of the day, the trust of the regulator by all stakeholders will be critical to a successful response. If the regulator loses the trust of its stakeholders, then it loses the ability to be a critical player in helping the healthcare system and the overall political system respond to the pandemic. There were also operational challenges for the regulators. How do you develop the needed scientific efficacy and data on products in the midst of this kind of pandemic situation? I think, as many of the regulators will attest, they were overwhelmed by numerous clinical trial applications, many of which were not designed or powered to even be informative. And they were trying to exist in a world where there was basically science by press release in a never-ending 24-hour news cycle. There was unprecedented political pressure and public statements on the benefit risk profile of various products being made by people that basically undermined the regulatory authorities' responsibilities and the messages they should have been giving to their people. In looking at how to best use the resources that one has, as Elizabeth pointed out, even an agency as well-resourced as the US FDA was overwhelmed by the numbers of applications and the issues with which they had to deal. So how can you decide if there are other agencies that you can rely on to inform your own decision? And how do you decide which ones you can? And then if you do that, how can you be assured that you're getting the same version of the product that your reference agency reviewed? And then how do you, going back to this very critical issue of communication, express uncertainty in a world that is clamoring for certainty? And how do you prepare your people for the inevitable new information that will keep coming in this very scientifically iterative process and will change, as Elizabeth pointed out in several examples, your regulatory perspective as you learn more over time? It's a very different regulatory paradigm that one is using here, and how you communicate that and how you prepare your people and your politicians and your healthcare systems for regulatory decisions that will be iterative and will be changing as more information is developed over time. These are all strategic and operational challenges that regulators were forced to address. And we do have an incredibly distinguished panel of colleagues today. They have been introduced to you. You see their names here. And what we're going to do now is go through a series of questions related to many of these strategic and operational challenges and hear directly from these people who had to make decisions in the midst of this environment and this ecosystem and hear how they tried to approach it. We have a lot of questions to get to. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. That was my last slide. And I would like to first start with our regulators from Colombia and from Mexico. And this is the question. And why don't we start with you, Maria Margarita. And the question is, going back to this ecosystem that I was trying to describe, you know, access to healthcare products really became a challenge for all countries, as I'm sure it was for you all there in Colombia. And you were responsible for doing this benefit risk profile decision, often on products that were coming from outside of Colombia, often from products that were coming from countries that we know do not have a very strong regulatory system. But yet the pressure was increasing, both in the press and in the political system, and the patients saying, we need something. And you were having to kind of juggle this issue of the demand for products versus your knowledge of incomplete or weak evidence. And so how did you try to approach this there in Colombia to meet these different demands? Over to you. Thank you.
Gracias. Bueno, en Colombia hicimos
Thank
muchas
you. In Colombia, we did many things. Once the emergency started, or once the health emergency was declared in Colombia, we moved ahead to make sure that there wasn't a stock out of products, and we began to create very long lists of vital products that were not available, not just drugs, but also medical devices, hygiene products, etc., before they became in shortage in the market. And so we arranged import without health registration, but complying with authorization and minimal requirements, such as the authorization of other agencies, reference agencies. And we also very much worked hand in hand with the national industry. As was mentioned by the representative of the FDA, we involved them in many innovations, trying to make sure that it complied with INVIMA's procedures and with the innovations required in terms of respirators and mechanical ventilators. We also had clinical trials that really took off. There were many requests for clinical trials. We improved the times. We made requirements more flexible. We moved up procedures as quickly as possible. We also had a figure in place by the end of 2020 for emergency use authorization, as exists already in other countries, in order to begin to accept the use of vaccines in the phase that they were available secondary fashion, so that we could verify the available information about quality, safety, and effectiveness, and to do this risk-benefit analysis that would favor our population. And the emergency use authorization in June of 2021 went through another regulatory change, which allowed these emergency use authorizations to be updated and modified at request of the government through the Ministry of Health, and also at the request of the holder of the authorization. So it was very dynamic and very updated so that decisions could be made when needed. Thank you.
Gracias. Alejandro,
Thank you.
from COFEPRIS, the same question. How did you all in Mexico approach these challenges that Maria Margarita was just speaking about? Over to you. Is Alejandro with us at this point?
Mike, I believe they had the problem. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I just communicated with them. We can
Okay.
circle back soon.
All right, thanks. I've just
Thank you.
heard that Cofepris is having a problem technically joining us, so hopefully they will be able to before the end of the session. Why don't we move on then to Haiti at WHO Geneva? And Haiti, I think all of us know that prior to your coming to WHO, you were the head of the Tanzanian agency. So you obviously have walked in the shoes of many of the people who are talking today. You know the reality and the pressures that are on national agencies. So people at WHO Geneva obviously were looking at ways that they could assist national agencies in the work they had to do. And one of the things that became part of our regulatory lexicon now is the phrase EUL, which many people perhaps did not know about previously, for the emergency use listing. And this was an innovative approach promoting alignment of regulatory processes as it was implemented. But one of the things that I think many of us were impressed with as you all implemented the EUL this time, particularly for vaccines, where you brought regulators from various parts of the world to come together to be part of the EUL assessment program, which we know particularly really did expedite the registration of EUL vaccines and the authorization of vaccines, particularly in Africa, through some of the innovative collaborative procedures that you all set up. Do you want to talk a little bit about those and what you think were some of the key elements of the work that WHO Geneva and the regional offices did to help the national authorities and during this pandemic? Thanks. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Mark. And of course, a very good morning to all the participants. Good afternoon from Geneva. I'm also very honored to join you in this very important conference covering Maria-Angela Simao, my Assistant Director General, who was to join you, but she has some emergency and therefore could not make it. So thanks, Mark, also for that question, but also for the background. For the fact that I have been on the shoes of the regulators that are attending this conference now. So first of all, to thank actually those countries that actually contributed to the WHO-led global assessment that actually brought together regulatory experts from across the 6 WHO regions to join us in terms of assessing the applications that were submitted for emergency use listing as soon as these products, the vaccines became available from the manufacturers. So in terms of the most relevant successes that we can share in terms of this approach was in fact the inclusiveness and of course inviting regulators from the countries to join the global assessment team. And I must say that, and as you rightly put it out, that has been the question most of the time from the regulators, that the WHO has been promoting reliance, but then the question is that regulators are not fully informed in terms of what is actually to be relied upon, where is the evidence, and therefore the fact that the regulators from across the member states were actually, from across our 6 regions were actually invited. This brought about inclusiveness, but also efficiency in the process, and particularly with respect to the fact that there was acceptability also of the outcomes as soon as the EULs were granted. So apart from the actual participation, and some of you recall that we had actually a number of preparatory webinars in 2020 before the actual assessments did take place. We actually had organized close to 20 such webinars across the globe, several of them in the region of the Americas. And we also, some of you also recall that we were actually issuing what we call biweekly regulatory updates and preparing regulators for the vaccines that will be coming to them for assessment and of course, immediate approvals. So we see that countries did feel involved, and therefore bringing the ownership to the process, but also making them ready to rely on the outcomes with confidence, because there was evidence for which they can rely upon, because they were actually themselves part of the process. Our pre-qualification team also provided access to dossiers. This was very critical because many manufacturers could not actually submit applications directly to all our 194 member states, and therefore, upon signing of the confidentiality disclosure agreement, manufacturers therefore did not need to approach each and of course in every country or every regulator and submit separate applications. So as we did not know, of course, as they did not know in advance which vaccine will actually be going to which country under the COVAX facility. So these are some of the lessons that we can take up. And as some of you may be aware, the results of this process were actually amazing. We witnessed regulatory agilities and flexibilities, of course, in practice. We have had, for example, 101 countries granting emergency use authorizations within the first 15 days following the first emergency use listings by WHO in mid-February this year. And in my view, this is actually a record number in the history of application of reliance principles, and therefore facilitating timely access to much needed vaccines during a pandemic. As we speak today, we have witnessed, I can give you one example because I'm also sitting at the interface between our regional offices and the countries in terms of promoting approvals of vaccines that are supplied through the COVAX facility, be it a donation, be it allocation, for example, for AstraZeneca vaccines alone. We have seen over 1,000 regulatory authorizations coming from multiple donors, but also from multiple manufacturing sites across our member states, close to 120 countries that have actually received these doses, but also having authorized based on WHO emergency use listing, and also under exceptional circumstances based on emergency use authorizations by stringent regulatory authorities. So a big thank you to all those who supported this process. We have also, all of us, witnessed the success in terms of countries actually getting the doses that they needed through the COVAX facility. And this is something that we can all be proud of. And back to you, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hidi. Very, very much appreciated. You know, I think one of the things that all of us realized was that when you are putting products into a larger population based on incomplete data, you really are having to depend on your post-marketing pharmacovigilance system and surveillance systems to really feed back information that allows you to do the iterative regulation that this kind of a pandemic requires. And so I'd like to turn to our colleagues from the Uppsala Monitoring Center with a question. Penelope, as the as you are the center for pharmacovigilance information sharing and analysis, when you all saw what was happening around the world, that these products were being released as they had to be under these circumstances, I'm sure you realized that people were going to be looking to you all and to national pharmacovigilance systems to provide the data that would be needed to see if indeed these products really maintained their positive benefit risk profile. Were there any things that you all did differently at Uppsala? Were there things, programs that you implemented to try to address what you knew were going to be coming in as far as reports? And as we all know, it's not only, getting the reports, but it's risk analysis, it's risk management, it's risk communication. I mean, this is all part of a quality pharmacovigilance system. So how did you all approach this at the Uppsala Center?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. And first of all, a very good morning to you all, and thank you, Paolo, for this kind invite to the panel discussion. It has been a pleasure listening to the keynote speaker, the introduction of the moderator, and the discussion of this honorable assembly. So thank you. Thank you for that question. I mean, there were a kind of preparation phase for us at the Uppsala Monitoring Center. And the first step was actually to make sure that the tools for reporting to the global, the WHO global database, that reporting was possible on a national level. Because, well, if we turn back time 1 year, there were not many COVID vaccine reports in the WHO database. Now there are 2.7 million vaccine reports. So in a preparedness phase, it was important to make sure that the tools for data collection were there. So there were some add-ons developed for the UMC tools for the data collection, VigiFlow, as you might heard of. There was an expansion for the WHO IAFI form and a vaccine e-reporting tool that allowed healthcare workers to report through an easy to access online form. Then what happened? When we came back after Christmas, there was a rapid growth of reports. And this led to a period of intense work focus across most areas of the UMC. For example, terminology specialists dedicated considerable resources into covering all the variants of vaccines in the WHO dictionary for incoming reports, so that analysis could take place in the next step. So that was a very important thing. The UMC Signal team worked continually to analyze the data that came in. They provided signal reports as well as publishing a monthly descriptive reports of the global reporting pattern. And that report has been well received also in this region, and it seems to be of value to many national centers. The volumes and rate of incoming reports caused a rethinking of UMC's internal signal prioritization strategy. The Signal team have collaborated successfully with WHO headquarters and also with the new group of external clinical experts helping us with the clinical assessments. And our collaborating center is there to complement what regulators are doing, not to replicate. So this has also made us collaborate in a totally new way, I would say. So, and next, in parallel, we have also offered PV education and training during the pandemic in different settings, and now we have even more learners. We reach even more learners with our new learning management system. We have offered virtual training in Spanish, for example, on our analysis tool Vigilize. And this week, UMC gives an online PV course series in Spanish with participants from 11 countries from the POWER region. So we have adapted to this very special period, I would say, and I will leave the floor to our CEO, Hervé Lelouet, to say something about the future approach. Over to you, Hervé.
Thank you very much, Penelope. Good day to all. Thank you very much for inviting us to this prestigious meeting. I'm Hervé Lelouet, so I'm Professor of Clinical Pharmacology, and I'm the new CEO of the Uppsala Monitoring Center. Of course, Penelope talked about the preparation we did. It was a difficult period because finally we came in the pandemic, and during this pandemic, the CEO changed. So we'll have to face some bumping period because we needed to adapt and to really to adapt all the tools because it was acting like more or less a crash test. So we implemented immediately some key measures that Penelope commented, but we also planned for the future because, as I told you, the pandemics act like a crash test and show the limits of the way we are detecting signal and assessing signal currently. So we had recently with ET a high-level meeting with many scientific people to see how we can improve the quality of the signals detected via disproportionality in VGBase, which is like, say, Penelope, a 30 million ICSR inside. So we will progress on that. As Penelope mentioned already, we are developing a kind of privileged partnership with the best experts in every field of medicine all over the world. So we'll try to provide the PIDM with all the best possible signal we have. But as said our colleague McClunkey, is that now PIDM, it's not only drug monitoring, it's also to continue and to act in the field of risk management. So we need to develop tools aiming not only to detect the signal, true signal and validated signal, but also to allow all the people to assess the impact of the signal in their own setting and to give them some element to use the resource they have in the best way to mitigate this risk. It's what I wanted to say. And Penelope, if you want to continue, I'm happy to give you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Javier. I think I have said what I wanted for this question. So thank you.
Thank you both, Penelope and Hervé, for your contributions there. I just have a follow-up question for the two of you. One of the things that we often hear is that much of the data that has supported the EUAs either comes from Europe, or it comes from North America, or it comes from China. But there are many parts of the world that did not participate in the clinical trials. And there's always the question about, are there differences in how these vaccines either are effective or have safety issues based on other issues that might not have been addressed looking at the clinical trials population? Are you all at the point yet, looking at these 2 million reports that have come in, that you can begin to look, are there regional specific signals that you are beginning to detect, or, which would be the news I think everyone would want to hear, you're not detecting them, and people can extrapolate the data from the clinical trials more globally than perhaps they thought they could. Can either of you address that issue at this point?
Thank you very much for this question, because for us it's a key issue. First of all, VGBase is mostly a database of post-marketing ICSR, so we have a few clinical trials inside. Second, it's true that we have mainly cases coming from the US, coming from Europe, coming from the main country, I would say, of ICH, and less from India, Africa, and even China. It depends sometimes on the quality of the different setting. But in a way, we are aware of that, and we try to find some solution on how to assess signal adapted to the country where they are according to what we have. So that's true that the question raised is that what is the validity of a signal detected at the global level when it comes to specific setting? And it is the way I want to develop the UMC, because we try to explore how to sometimes handle the database in a different way. But we had some example during the pandemic showing that we had true signal, validated signal, but finally, when you talk with different countries, they said, but we are not concerned with that. And finally, they are reluctant to use information we provide them. So we must be clever on that and to always adapt the signal in different settings. It's not easy. For that, we must have a more pharmacoepidemiological approach. This is why we are working with different other organizations, aiming to put a denominator to this numerator, and then to have a measure of the impact of the signal detected at the worldwide level, but what is the impact at the regional level. So the problem is not so much to have a lot of data, because we have data coming from all over the world. Of course, we have much more from the US and Europe, but it doesn't mean that we can't do something in Africa, in China, in India, or other different settings. But we need to modify a bit the approach, and once again, to have much more risk management oriented strategy rather than only detecting signal in a global database where we know that we reach some limit.
Super. Thank you very, very much. One of the other issues that I think we all know occurs once these products are in wider circulation is that we know, unfortunately, that we live in a world where there are people who have a much more nefarious agenda and not a public health agenda. And we start beginning to see substandard and falsified versions of these products coming on the market. So I would like to turn right now to Ron at USP, because this is an issue I know, Ron, that USP has particularly been focused on, and quality and assuring the quality in the marketplace of products. And are there things that you all have done? Are there ideas that you can share with our audience here on this issue of substandard and falsified COVID-19 products? Thanks. Over to you.
Thank you, Mac. And I really do appreciate the chance to speak here and to join these fellow panelists. And before I share some of course, what we all know are real challenges and even things that can be quite disappointing, I do want to just really applaud the overall amazing effort by both the industry and regulators to bring these life-saving vaccines in absolutely remarkable time to billions around the world. That said, all of that good news, the falsified substandard medicines, of course, are always a challenge. One thing that is just logically clear, but also backed up very strongly by the data, is that when you have a combination of high demand and constricted supply, it creates the highest likelihood for both substandard and then especially counterfeit medicines, in this case, vaccines. One of the challenges, the additional challenges, of course, of the pandemic is that it created also very rapid and repeated demand spikes for different kinds of medical products, including medicines, both medicines that were directly related to treating COVID and those that were perhaps ancillary to treat other diseases and then were being used in the pandemic. And then if you combine the supply chain challenges that you saw around the world, just in general, including reduced airlines, reduced flights where a lot of the medicines were being transmitted, and what you ended up with was, reduction in the supply chain, a spike in demand, and a high demand leading to substandard and counterfeits. That's a lot of stress on that system. The final piece here, Mac, as you think about the substandard falsified, is a matter of course, detecting and trying to remove, but you also want to create disincentives, or in the other case, incentives. And at USP, of course, was an institution founded 200 years ago with a very simple purpose, which is to improve the supply of quality medicines, at first in the US and now globally. We adhere to that simple piece, which is a substandard medicine is not quality. A counterfeit medicine is certainly not. And so it's a bit of a back to basics. In the basics of ensuring the medicine quality, which is not just the production, but also how it is being shipped and transmitted, and then by the user to have the tools available to be able to play at least some role in ensuring that what they're delivering is of good quality, which can be challenging in a complex medicine like a vaccine.
Thanks so much, Ron. Very much appreciated. All of the work that the regulators and our colleagues in the post-marketing world do really has no impact if the products don't actually make it to the patients who need them. And that's obviously a supply chain issue that have many people involved. And so I'd like to turn to Daniel now, if I could. And Daniel, as in your position, as you tried to implement your strategy to help the PAHO member states access quality products in this very dynamic, iterative ecosystem of the pandemic, what were some of the main hurdles that you encountered? How did you approach these? And I guess really more importantly, what do you think are things we could do better next time, both from the regulatory agency perspective and from the industry perspective? Thanks. Over to you.
Thank you, Mac. And voy a hablar en español. Muchas gracias, Mac. Muchas gracias y gracias por la invitación. For the invitation to this panel. I would like to refer to the strategy that we adopted in the Americas to respond to the pandemic as far as procurement challenges and recommendations. As far as our strategy in the Americas, we do have a advantage over the rest of the world for access to health technology, vaccines, and medicines. For many decades, we've had the mechanisms in place, the strategic fund, for example, for access to vaccines, which we use to facilitate access to medicines, vaccines, and technologies to member countries. These two regional mechanisms became part of the global mechanism under what we call the accelerator. COVAX, working with UNICEF, PAHO, implemented this procurement strategy, making use of this mechanism. Now, on challenges, we have the regional mechanism, we have the global mechanism. However, we do still face some challenges. Only 4% of inputs for the COVID response came from our region. So we are highly dependent on markets in Asia, Europe, and the United States. However, we know these markets provide quality products, but we have to deal with the logistic difficulties and barriers. And so we were forced to seek out alternatives for new products with producers that we did not know anything about their laboratories and other technical information that we needed to have. So that was one of our challenges, and I should recognize what was done right and how, based on that positive experience, we could expand that or make that inclusive of new procurement efforts. Now, the emergency use list of WHO reliance among laboratories and other things made it possible for us to adapt. Now, for WHO and COVAX, information was made readily available between producers and the COVAX mechanism and countries. There were agreements of confidentiality signed by the different agencies with WHO, and that brought a positive impact, not just in the authorization practices, but in procurement itself. So the products didn't have to be evaluated by PAHO for the tenders, and that really facilitated the negotiation process and our interaction with pharmaceutical companies. We didn't have to deal with country by country requirements, and so that was really helpful. Industry played an important role, and PAHO as well. WHO is also very critical to ensure transparency in all of the different processes. Now, on reliance, the practice of reliance, that is recognition of pre-qualification practice of WHO, it would have been very difficult to undertake these purchases had it not been for that. That's not really a recommendation, but that was something that worked well. But it would be good, again, now by way of recommendation, if such practices were expanded more broadly, collaboration with industry, among regulatory agencies, greater reliance, using joint procurement systems such as the revolving fund of PAHO. Hearing from FDA, this flexibility that she spoke of was very important, and collaboration and engagement of all the different parties involved, all the stakeholders. And that's the same thing that PAHO has had as a part of the COVAX mechanism.
Gracias, Daniel. Thank you for your contribution there. I understand our colleague Alejandro Sparch from Copipris has been able to join us. Alejandro, are you on and can you hear us? Great, wonderful. It looks like you are perhaps muted. Now you're unmuted. Great, thanks. I want to ask you the same question that we asked Maria Margarita from Invima earlier in the session, and that is, as a national agency, you obviously during this pandemic, and particularly in the early parts of the pandemic, were under a great deal of pressure from your political leaders, from your consumers, from your media, for making decisions when you really had incomplete data and you still wanted to make a scientifically robust decision, but a flexible decision that weighed the benefits and the risks as you knew them at that time and under the circumstances. Can you tell us a little bit about how Cofepris approached dealing with these pressures from the political leadership, from the media, from consumers, from industry, to stay the course and to do the job that you have to do to promote and to protect public health in Mexico? Over to you. Thanks.
Muchas gracias. A nombre de la Comisión Federal para la
Thank you on behalf of the Federal Commission Against Health Risks. We thank you for the opportunity to speak, and we congratulate the Pan American Health Organization and the Network for Drug Regulatory Harmonization. Now, in our region, despite or regardless of the level of maturity that we have, the COVID-19 pandemic gave rise to much pressure for health agencies. Health agencies and their quality mechanisms were charged with ensuring that decisions that were taken, even under much pressure, that they be decisions that follow the guiding principle of protecting health, and that is to ensure that inputs for health, products for health, be of quality, be safe and effective, as we all deserve. Now, equitable access to medical devices is a priority in our healthcare system. To strengthen the regulatory capacity in the region, in our continent, has gradually risen by applying strategies to achieve the objectives of protecting against health risks throughout the continent. We have exchanged experiences. There's been better collaboration among our countries, and I would underscore, of course, the important work done by the working group of PAHO on medical devices and regulation, and that helped us understand the problem that all of our agencies face. Now, as the division of protecting health as a right, without a doubt, one of the lines of action at COFEPRIS is to ensure efficacy, security or safety, and quality of equipment, devices, and medicines, and that any decision made be free of any type of political meddling or interference or any type of pressure because of the pandemic. Now, to that end, we believe that exercising oversight and control in our health regulatory function, that is, for this, we have established provisions that enable us to work on a roadmap toward normative convergence focused on medicines and medical devices, such that the regulatory agencies can make decisions quickly based on the scientific and technical knowledge and information of other regulatory agencies from the region. That explains COFEPRIS's approach to this problem.
Gracias, Alejandro. Very much appreciate your contribution there, and that's a very clear, helpful explanation. Maria Margarita, could I come back to you perhaps for another question? When you answered originally, you talked about instituting an emergency use authorization system in Colombia. Obviously, at the time, you had fairly robust data on the efficacy of the vaccines, but clearly no long-term safety data on the vaccines. So you, I'm sure, looked at how you could work with your national immunization program to get more data once the vaccines started rolling out to the people there in Colombia. Can you tell us a little bit about how you worked with your national immunization program to get data and to make joint decisions going forward once the EUA was issued and vaccines started going out to the Colombian people? Thank you.
Bueno, muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Without a doubt, I think that one of the problems that we faced with this pandemic was the difficulty in accessing information. This is something that all of our countries have encountered. We've seen the effects, the result of not having ready access to information, and that's why we have tried to keep up ongoing cooperation with the whole region, with all the countries, with the different organizations. That's something very positive that resulted from this pandemic, that we have been able to better coordinate handling of information. Now, in our country, we've also worked with the Health Ministry and the National Institute of Health, and in a pharmacosurveillance system that includes the whole chain of distribution, and the reports that we have to receive as a regulatory agency have to be received appropriately, and they have to be followed up on to ensure that the information be strengthened, and that there's a constant follow-up on this. It's never interrupted, and so that's been our strategy. Now, that entails a number of actors working with other ongoing oversight in VIMA, looking into whatever cases that warrant special consideration. Thank you.
Gracias. Hiti, could I turn to you for a second question, please? I know you mentioned in your first response the WHO's perspective on reliance and on promoting reliance as a best 21st century regulatory practice. We all know you have come out recently with a good reliance practices document that really, I think, for many of us around the world kind of sealed this practice as a best regulatory practice. I think early on you talked about how people were relying on the EUL and how effective that was. But I think we also know that you at WHO also rely on work that is done by agencies in various parts of the world. And as we look at the COVID vaccines in particular, I think your work with the European Medicines Agency stands out as an interesting way of collaborating and working together and relying on the work that the EMA was doing on these vaccines that helped really inform a lot of the EUL information and the EUL decision making. Can you talk a little bit about that part of this process and how you see going forward not only agencies relying on WHO, but WHO relying on agencies to help with the pre-qualification and with the emergency use listing processes. Thanks. Over to you.
Yeah. Thank you again, Mark, for this follow-up question based on my previous response. So you are right that we collaborate with a number of mature agencies, and this is also, of course, in line with the principles that are in the recently published WHO guidelines on reliance that were published at the beginning of this year after a number of consultations with our member states. So as you may be aware, also some of the participants here may be aware that our pre-qualification program has actually indeed a procedure in place, what we call abbreviated or streamlined assessment pathway, when we rely on what we call national regulatory authorities of reference. And this was already published in one of our technical report series that is adopted by the Expert Committee on Biological Standardization. So we have a list of agencies there that PQ do rely on them, and we have 11 of those agencies. They are actually on our website. And the European Medicines Agency is one of those agencies that we rely in the case of vaccines assessment. And PQ has, of course, agreements with a number of such agencies in order to allow for accelerated assessments, but also approvals based on the same principles of reliance, that it's not only that countries rely on the output that comes from the PQ, but also PQ vaccines also do rely on other, it's also applicable for medicines. So this has been the spirit in terms of our collaboration with the European Medicines Agency, and especially for vaccines that are donated through the COVAX facility, and especially or where there are bilateral agreements with the countries between the donor and the recipient. So we do also promote this reliance approaches. We have, of course, as I said, we have an agreement with the European Medicines Agency for exchanging information, including the assessment reports, letters of a list of questions, and also the responses that they receive when they are undertaking the assessments. What is new in this particular case during this COVID response with the European Medicines Agency is what they call the COVID Task Force program, which also allows us as WHO to actually participate in the discussions on specific vaccines candidates for emergency use listing. And during the parallel review of these vaccines, our team also received the questions from the European Medicines Agency to the applicants, and the responses that they also get. So this has been of course the practice. I just wanted to also to add in terms of the work that we have also been undertaking over the last 2 or 3 years with regards to the new concept of replacing the WHO, replacing the concept of stringent regulatory authorities with the WHO listed authorities, which has attracted discussions from across our member states over the past few years with the policy adopted in 2020 and of course published this year with a definition to replace the stringent regulatory authorities. We also foresee that this framework of WHO listed authorities will also have a major impact in terms of how we will be seeing reliance in the future, because this will be through a pathway where we have evidence in terms of the performance of those agencies that WHO will rely, but also other regulators will be relying on them. And we see this as a new concept of smart regulation, which is based on the principles of reliance, and as clearly also articulated in the policy document. The intentions and the benefits of the WLA will be to actually promote trust and confidence, and also building reliance among regulators. But most important is also to increase the pool of those authorities, in addition to the 11 that I've mentioned, for example, in the area of vaccines, but of course we have a bigger number for medicines as well. The pool of those agencies that we can rely upon in terms of our streamlined assessment procedures, and therefore increasing efficiency in our assessments and including inspections, and therefore ensuring that there's immediate access of much needed products, especially during the pandemics, as we have witnessed during, of course, during the current COVID-19 pandemic. So the ultimate goal of all these efforts is to make sure that everybody receives across the globe, regardless of where they are, safe, effective, and quality assured medical products, in this case, vaccines. And we see that we are making good progress. We have received several comments from regulators over the last few months, and now we are working on the comments on the operational guidance. And we are looking forward together with the regulators, especially from the region of the Americas, where we received substantive comments to get the operational guidance of the WHO listed authority in place, and we have this into action from 2022. So thank you, and back to you, Mark.
Thanks very much, Hidi. I know the work you all have done on the WLA process has been a real labor of love, and it has been a tremendous lift for many, many people, not only in Geneva, but as you say, in the regional offices and in various stakeholder groups around the world. I know we're all looking forward to the ultimate implementation of it and seeing how it really does affect this whole process of regulation through reliance pathways going forward in the years to come. I have one more question I want to ask Alejandro, but before I do that, if there are questions from those of you listening, please go to the Q&A button on the screen and place your questions there. We've gotten one question, and I will ask that one to the panel after this question to Alejandro. But if there are other questions, please put them there, and we will try to get to as many as we possibly can in the time we have allotted for this panel discussion. Alejandro, when you were talking a few minutes ago, you talked about reliance and how you all were approaching this during the pandemic. One of the things I wanted to ask was, as you look at your approaches to reliance and trying to figure out how you might use that in years to come, what you might do better, can you comment on, were you able to use the WHO EUL listings? Were there PAHO information that was helpful to you? What did you find helpful? What did you find not helpful? And what would you do better in the next pandemic in this aspect of reliance? Thanks.
Muchas gracias, Mac.
Thank you very much, Mac, for the question. I think that the regional report launched by the Pan American Health Organization this year, strengthening of regulatory systems in the region of the Americas, lessons learned from the reference regulatory authorities, very important and answers this question. And it is that regulatory optimization of regulatory systems, without a doubt, is an essential component of the proper operation of the health system. The pandemic has clearly shown this, and under this premise, regulatory convergence in the region of the Americas has a fundamental role to play in terms of understanding our regulatory processes for pharmaceutical products. And without leaving aside technical and scientific rigor, it helps us build trust in the decisions by our authorities in order to avoid the duplication of efforts and resources, and without losing sight of continued existing technical cooperation efforts to strengthen the regulatory capacity of the entire region. The strategic recommendations made in this document to strengthen the work of regulatory authorities in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic makes very clear what the important areas are to regulate and where we should be aiming our work as regulatory agencies. Above all, what are the tools and measures that we need to implement in order to enhance capacity in the health area? There is something we would like to share with you. First of all, adaptability. We need to move forward with the adaptability of our rules in the face of health emergencies. COVID has shown the need to move forward with such changes. Also, simplification of our regulatory processes for the authorization of health supplies that have an impact of handling a pandemic. Also, digitalization of our processes. It's very important that the regional, that the regulatory authorities of our region must do. It makes it easier to trace the process and follow it. And it's also been extensively stated at this meeting that we must have the sharing of technical and scientific information. Above all, information that will impact regulatory decision-making. In addition, we have also identified that it is unavoidable in order to reduce inequities in public health and in terms of access to drugs, that we must have an appropriate system for collaboration and technology transfer, both north to south and south-south, both in the public and private sectors. This could lead to more and better innovative practices in terms of the development of new products to treat the main diseases affecting our countries. We believe that this is extremely important. And in this way, we are trying to, I hope that answers your question, Mac. Thank you.
Gracias, Alejandro. It does. Thank you very much. One of the questions from the audience, I think perhaps, I mean, obviously, any of you, if you would like to answer, please join in. But I think perhaps Hiti and Maria Margarita, since you also mentioned this, maybe we could go to you two first. The question was, we've talked a lot about the primary authorization of these products and reliance and EUAs and getting these primarily authorized. Obviously, there needs to be continued flow of information because we're learning. This is a very iterative process, as we've talked about. What do you see as ways to improve sharing learnings as the process goes on after the primary authorization? Are there things, Hiti, you all are doing at WHO RPQ to enhance and to make easier the sharing of new data? And perhaps, Maria Margarita, you on the receiving end, are there things that you would like to see? Are there ways you think information could be shared more efficiently, more quickly, and more helpfully to the national authorities? Hiti, first to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mark, for this follow-up question. And of course, my colleague Elizabeth has also provided some answer to one of the questions in the Q&A. Just to say that for countries that have, which is majority of the low and middle income countries that have signed the confidentiality disclosure agreement with our pre-qualification team, they have access, as I said in my previous interventions, they have access to full documentation that is submitted to WHO secure platform. and therefore they have access to the original documentation, full dossier from the manufacturer, but also they have access to assessment reports. So that's one. And secondly, if there are any changes post-emergency use listing, that is also submitted to our vaccines assessment team. This information will also be available to those who have access, and this is majority of these countries, and therefore any post-approval or post-emergency use listing changes that the manufacturers share, and that is also reviewed by our PQ team, is also made available to those who have signed this agreement. So basically, we are doing whatever we can, and we have actually seen this in practice during this period when we are actually very much coordinating, for example, approval of donations that were coming from sites that receive additional manufacturing sites, for example, that were not initially on the initial EUL and which were submitted later and therefore added to the list. So I give an example again, go back to AstraZeneca, where we have, I think, close to between 8 and 9 additional, different manufacturing sites for drug substance and of course drug product, and therefore all these changes that happened after the original, the very first EUL, these changes are also accessible to the countries, and countries can check and can verify before they actually approve and authorize vaccines to go into their country. So this has been what we have been doing, and we have seen this being beneficial to our member states, and we have some actually very latest experiences, not in the region of the Americas, but in other regions where one of the countries was actually receiving a donation, and their national law is requiring that they have to be a local company which has to submit an application. So this dummy application has to be made, and then the information, and this was actually a variation. And for them to approve, the only source of information was also on our secure platform, and we facilitated that, and the country was able to receive a donation, and based on the evidence that they were able to get, which was not available in the original, the very first emergency use authorization by the country. So this is in practice, and we see that this should be also the future when we also have therapeutics in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Hiti. Elizabeth Plut from the PQ unit, I see you have your hand raised. Do you want to make an intervention here before we go to Maria Margarita?
Yes, if you don't mind.
Please.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Hola todo el mundo. Buenos días, buenas tardes.
Hello, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon.
What Hiti said. So we have the secured platform. We use SharePoint for this. And so it allows us to, where the manufacturer uploads the dossier on their side. We use it for the review, and as Hiti explained, we have NRAs from different regions, different countries participating in this review process. And then at the end of the process, once we've given EUL recommendation, we share it with the countries. So as we all should not forget, so these vaccines have not finalized their development. So they're still in clinical phase 3 trials are ongoing. So every time when we list the vaccine on our website, there's also, when we publish the report, we also come with the list of post-EUL recommendations and requirements. So there's a whole list that the manufacturers need to abide to be able, and also, of course, one of the requirements when we accept an expression of interest is that the vaccine is close to receiving an emergency approval, an emergency authorization at country level. But also at the end, the manufacturer, once we give an EUL recommendation or listing, the manufacturer has to finalize the product and towards pre-qualification. So in this period, there's these post-EUL commitments that we request from the manufacturer. So these are also then every time uploaded on our website, in the secure platform, and where it's public information, this will be then translated into being available in our website. For example, the product insights, inserts, the product leaflets, or the SMPC as they call them in Europe. Each time there's an update, we review the clinical dossier. My colleagues review the clinical dossier. we have this dossier is information available for the NRAs, but then the public information is then the product inserts that then are posted on our website. So we've got this constant flow of updating and making sure that the countries have access to the latest information. If they still have technical questions, as Hiti said also earlier, we have these webinars, these meetings that we had all over the global level with the different regions, where we specifically answer questions from NRAs to make sure that they're comfortable with the decision-making process. And also we respond to individual questions. We've got an email address and I can put it in the chat. So any question people have, they can send an email to that. They can also send them an email in French or in Spanish, and Portuguese. I will use Google Translate to answer. But some of my colleagues speak, and if I don't have the answer, I make sure that the focal points, they can answer the questions. Because the whole idea of this process is that we assist the NRAs, that we facilitate their decision-making process. We've done it for Ebola, we've done it for NOPV2, we've done it for COVID. COVID was such a large scale that it's been more through bigger meetings, but we've participated in meetings with NRAs, also for NOPV, to make sure that the country feels comfortable, because these are important decisions that they take. They have a lot of responsibility on their shoulder, and we want to make sure that they're able to answer the questions to the Ministry of Health. Over.
Thank you very, very much. Maria Margarita, the last word from the national authorities' perspective, please.
Bueno, lo que han dicho Hiti y Elizabeth es fundamental. El rol, la labor.
What Hiti and Elizabeth said are essential regarding the role of PAHO WHO. All of this is very necessary in this kind of situation. You are a source of reliable and transparent information, not only for us as regulatory authorities, but also for our governments, our countries, and our citizens. So what has been done is very important. And I also think that we need to continue to strengthen our communications and cooperation strategies so that this information will be available. It's different when it's a pharmaceutical association or a pharmaceutical company publishing its information than when it is an international intergovernmental organization or regulatory authority. The citizens and government and other regulatory authorities will have more trust in it. So we want to have this type of information flowing so that we can have transparency. As Elizabeth said, we can send an email, but what we have seen is that if we have this direct dialogue, for example, an opportunity like today to talk, even if you just want to unburden yourself about the troubles you've had in each country and each agency. Sometimes we feel like we're too alone. What should I do? I'm getting attacked on all sides and I'm getting bombarded with information from the media. We're all in the same situation. So however we can strengthen this situation helps support our decisions. It gives us some peace of mind, and it also gives peace of mind to a citizen who's going to go and get vaccinated. They can look at the information without feeling that something's being concealed from them or what they can know because there's something strange. You know about all of the anti-vaccine theories. So a tremendous job has been done here. We do see the change and the progress made. And I think that we all need to rededicate ourselves to this, along with all the pharmacovigilance steps and the regulatory harmonization, which has moved forward under this emergency, but it's yielded very good reports because our systems have evolved. And that's what I have to say. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Maria Margarita. That was a beautiful way to end the panel discussion. We have run out of time for the panel discussion. I want to just again thank most heartily all of our panel members. Those of you who submitted questions, I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them, but again, thanks to all of the panel members. And I turn this over back to you, Dr. Gamarra, to finish the session. Thank you. I think you're muted, Dr. Gamara.
Muy bien. Sí, perdón.
Thank you.
Yes, very well. Yes, excuse me for that. Thank you very much. And I thank the panelists as well for this excellent discussion. This is a very relevant topic, and I know that we could discuss it for hours, and it really helps us have sound foundations for regulatory convergence. So I thank you very much for that conversation. Now we will hear from Dr. Michael Rosu-Miles, the Executive Director of Health Canada, who is going to wrap up this session. Please, Dr. Rosu-Miles, turn on your microphone. You have the floor.
Thank you. I want to start off by thanking PAHO and the organizers for putting this excellent session together. I also want to express both my gratitude and congratulations to the regulatory bodies and international partners such as PAHO and WHO for their exceptional work throughout this pandemic. I think you should all be extremely proud of the contributions you've made to protecting the health of both your citizens, but also supporting human health on a global scale. So bravo, and I'll give you some applause for that. Thank you very much. If there's one thing that's been made very clearly evident during this pandemic, it's that we're all in this together. And that is only by viewing the challenges of COVID-19 from a global perspective that we can win the battle against this virus. Dr. Lumpkin actually said it very well when he expressed the novel pressures that we faced by our regulatory systems during this pandemic, complicating the way in which we assess risk and both make our regulatory decisions and communicate within and outside of our organizations. It was very interesting for me to hear from the panel members on how they adapted and evolved along with their environment to make and communicate regulatory decisions that were the most appropriate and beneficial based on the scientific data that was available at that time. And certainly we heard over and over again were the themes initially outlined by Dr. Hillebrenner of FDA, which were the value of regulatory flexibility and the power of engagement. Now, engagement with manufacturers was outlined as one important factor, but I would say engagement between regulatory partners and the WHO and PAHO needs to be emphasized as key to the success of our global outcomes. Information sharing, work sharing, and reliance are key components, not only to ensuring global equity, but also for harmonization of regulatory approaches and ensuring that vaccines and other treatments that are distributed throughout the world have met a similar stringent regulatory standard. Of course, a flexibility in these harmonized regulatory approaches was a key factor in the rapid manner in which we were able to respond to the pandemic. So we should note that the importance of pharmacovigilance and methods outlined by our UPSALA Monitoring Center colleagues, especially under conditions of regulatory flexibilities, are used under these conditions when pre-market authorization decisions are made using flexibilities. What this means is that increases in pre-market flexibilities need to be concomitant with increases in resources towards post-market monitoring activities, of which open communication, cooperation, and information sharing on a global scale is key. In closing, I'd like to restate the importance of global collaboration that was emphasized by my colleague Alejandro Svach of the Mexican Federal Commission, and of taking our lessons learned during the pandemic to strengthen our collaboration, cooperation, and reliance to support equities in all areas of global health, and not just in the pandemic. So thank you very much for inviting me to close the meeting today. I had a wonderful time listening to the presentations and the discussions. And I look forward to further interactions with PAHO in the future.
Muchas gracias, Michael.
Thank you very much, Michael, for that excellent summary of our session. I would again like to thank the panelists for their contributions, and I'd like to thank our moderator for his valuous opinions and contributions. Thank you, Mac. And with this, I think That concludes our session. I would now like to give the floor to the Secretariat of PANDRA for any final remarks. I have enjoyed chairing this meeting. I hope it's repeated soon. And I thank PANDRA for the possibility of bringing together our regulatory authorities to have convergence and harmonization. And so now I give the floor to the Secretariat of PANDRA for any additional comments. Thank you, Dr. Gamarra, and greetings. This has been a very interesting discussion and panel today. On behalf of the Secretariat of PANDRA, exercised by the Pan American Health Organization, along with our WHO colleagues, we wish to highlight, as colleagues have stated here, including Dr. Rosu Miles, the role of regulators, technical people from the Ministry of Health and the various institutions. And today we even had so many of you represented today. We want to acknowledge a very important role all of you have played. This has been very intense work, and we now invite you to turn on your cameras so that we can take a photo of this second session of the 10th conference. And we also want to add to the applause for your jobs. So as you turn on your cameras, I like to have everyone in this final photograph today. While we turn on our cameras, I want to make special mention to give recognition that the Director General of the WHO has given today to Carmen Amelia Rodriguez Hernandez, who is from the region of the Americas and has participated in PANDRA for her dedication, devotion, and her work in the pre-qualification of emergency use of the vaccines. Many of you know Carmen Amelia because you've interacted with her through the processes that Hiti described. And she also tremendously participated, the active participation of the national regulatory authorities and the sharing of information under the confidentiality agreements established with the WHO. So for our colleagues from the WHO, please extend our greetings and congratulations to Carmen on this well-deserved recognition. We also want to highlight our colleagues from WHO, Dr. Simão, who always helps us out over these 2 long, difficult years, and also Hiti and many other colleagues, Dr. Shantipal on vaccine surveillance. So I thank all of them as well, and we thank you for being here today. And I don't know if we've taken the photo yet, but meanwhile, we want to invite you to join us this Friday at 9 a.m. Washington time for the 3rd plenary of this 10th conference, in which we'll look at the challenge of offering comments for the post-COVID-19 agenda based on the lessons that we've learned during this pandemic. We want to look at what is different. We also have an information system about the new draft resolution that will be brought before the governing bodies for the next Pan American Sanitary Conference here at PAHO, with the presence of your ministers of health, to adopt a new policy for the strengthening of regulatory systems. So we'll be telling you about the proposal, the draft, and the process. So we invite you to be with us here on Friday at 9 a.m. Washington time. I don't know if we've taken the photo yet. We could have a last exercise just to know who's represented here. We invite you to, since we have 2 minutes left, we invite you to say over Slido what countries were represented during this session. So once again, I thank all of you for your contributions, the panelists, the coordinators, the chair, and please stay tuned for our Friday morning session. All right, I offer you the floor to let us know when the Slido poll is done, so we can say what countries are represented here. Thank you very much, everyone.
Gracias, José Luis. Bueno, rápidamente, entonces, en un
Yes, of
minuto.
course, Jose Luis. Very quickly, in 1 minute, we're going to do an audience characterization over Slido. I think everyone has your cameras, which nowadays are also our phones. So please go to the camera function to scan the QR code and answer the questions that will appear for you. To let us know what countries are represented here today. There's just 4 quick questions, and as you answer, we'll find out where you are from. And the type of institution you work in. And whether you participated in the last conference in El Salvador in 2018. And how many conferences you have participated in so far, how many of the 9. So this will let us know. We see a lot of interest from the most recent conferences. All right. We